be ready to start at 4.
We shouldn't have meetings on sunny days.
Because of the glare? No.
No, because we get so few of them. I came here from the garden.
Yeah, I've been spending all day in Palmer shopping instead of enjoying my garden. So lucky you.
The Chamber of Commerce will love you.
I'm sure.
Reached the magic hour, so I will call this meeting of the Cadet Regional District Finance Committee for February 16th.
Recording in progress.
22 to order, and recognize that this meeting is taking place on the traditional territory Willamette people who have called this home for many thousands of years. So the first item of business would be approval of the agenda. Dr. McCormick, the seconder, Dr. Brabazon. Discussion on the agenda. Don't see any. All those in favor of adopting the agenda is circulated. Any opposed? Carried unanimously. That brings us to item 3.1, the minutes of the Finance Committee meeting, January 19th, 2022. Someone would like to make a motion about those minutes?
I'll move adoption.
Seconder? I think Councillor Leishman's hands up. Director Leishman is hands up. Any errors or omissions? Any comments on the minutes? Don't see any. All those in favor of adopting the minutes is circulated. Any opposed? It's carried unanimously. Director Leishman, your TV screen, from my point of view, has a little hand signal on it as if you're trying to get the attention of the chair.
Oh, maybe.
That may be somebody else's. There, it's gone. That wasn't something within your control, but the people who do control it have taken care of the problem. So we're at item number 4.1. We have a delegation and inquiry from Jean Daly and Grant Wood of the Powell River Search and Rescue. Marie, a request for new personal protective equipment. Come on up, and you have 10 minutes to make your presentation.
We brought show and tell. So I'm Jean, President of Powell River Search and Rescue. Grant is Vice President of Powell River Search and Rescue. We're coming here to, we submitted a letter to Brian Thomas asking for money for personal protective equipment, new coats and pants, basically for new search and rescue, so we can continue doing our work. And he said that there probably wouldn't be any money. And I said, okay, can I address the council, the finance board directly? And he said, sure. So here we are, here to plead our case, is to answer any questions that may not have been clear in our first letter. So to let you know, after Ryan's reply that there probably wouldn't be any more money than the $5,000 that we normally get throughout the year, we went back and went through our budget with our treasurer with a fine-tooth comb and managed to find $10,000 in our budget by putting aside other items that we figure we don't need to work on until 2023. Like some prettying up of our buildings, a new printer, that kind of stuff. We figure, you know, we can live with what we've got for another year. We initially asked for $70,000, and after reconfiguring how many coats we would actually need and applying to Arc'teryx, which is the company that is endorsed by BC Search and Rescue Association and EMBC, we worked up to $66,000 for 40 coats and pants. Grant's going to tell you why we're looking at this particular company and what's wrong with the coats that we currently have. But I can also let you know that we have applied in the past to gaming provincial gaming, and they constantly change whether or not protective equipment coats are covered under gaming. Some years they are, some years they're not. Mostly they like to cover infrastructure or education, which we get through the regional district and we get through BC SARA. Also too, we've applied to community forest for infrastructure, and we are looking at applying to them as well for coats if we can't get the full amount from the regional district. But again, they like to apply for things that are solid, like buildings, paint, printers, not coats. But a coat is vital to being able to do the job that we do. Without a coat, you're just cold. And that's not what you need to be when you're out rescuing somebody. I know that regional district did cover the cost of the older style coats, but they're over 15 years old and we can't repurpose them. We can't get the weather protection back on them. They're just that worn out. They've been through many people in those 15 years. So they are getting very old. So coats through Arc'teryx, which is the company that is, like I said, endorsed by BC Search and Rescue Association. They're a provincial oversight body, are $1,000 a coat. They have a return or replace policy, which is why almost every organization in BC uses Arc'teryx. The groups that we support, Comox Valley, Campbell River, Sunshine Coast, Nanaimo, Aerosmith, they all wear Arc'teryx because of the return or replace, the repair or replace policy that they have, which means if you damage a coat, your organization doesn't need to purchase a new $1,000 coat. That's Arc'teryx. That's how much they believe in their company that they will replace the coat or repair it, or pants. Pants, so coats would be $40,000 for 40 coats, and pants would be $26,000 for 40 pairs of pants. And they're $650 a pair. Although Arc'teryx does sponsor and design coats specifically for search and rescue, they also have a pro deal that the more coats you order, the more deeper discount, they up to 45%. So that $1,000 coat, becomes a $5,500 coat. We have looked at ordering through Helly Hansen Pro and Patagonia, Columbia, but they're all American companies. They're not based in North Vancouver like Arc'teryx. And they change their dye lots all the time, whereas Arc'teryx has promised to keep the same dye lots forever. So if you ever need new coats, you don't have to worry that your red coat's no longer red, it's orange or fuchsia or any of the other variations you can get on red. So we are asking that you consider helping us fund these important pieces of equipment that, although they're not a solid object, they are important to what we do. And just statistically, just so you know, that since COVID, our call volume has doubled. We used to get 20 calls a year, we're up to 44. And that's over 300 hours per volunteer, like for the organization, that's 300 hours worth of searches in 1 year. That is a lot of time that we donate to the community, and to be able to attire or dress that volunteer in the proper equipment is a small vital gesture. And I don't believe our call volume is going to go down as the Vancouver West Coast trails and the Cape Scott trails get more and more crowded, and as they have to book reservations for those trails now, the Sunshine Coast Trail has become a huge magnet. And now that the travel restrictions are easing, we're probably going to get the flood of Europeans that we were starting to see before. So we go out all types of weather all the time. And like I said, 20 calls a year to over 40 in a year is, I feel that 40 is probably going to go up by another third again this summer as we get discovered. So I'm going to let Grant talk to you about the different kinds of coats.
First of all, let me say thank you for allowing us to come and speak. As Jean says, this is the jackets that we wear and the pants that we wear are a vital piece of safety equipment, for as far as environmentally as well as high visibility. One of the reasons that we're looking at this different coat, again, you know, the age of the coat that we have has, you know, is used up its lifespan. Also, we're looking at the jackets we're looking at have a male and female fitting, where the ones that we've had in the past are just a large jacket that are, you know, far too big for any of the females that we have working with us. And right now we're at about 30% of our members, our normally responding members, are female. And that number is going up all the time, which is awesome. Another reason why we're looking at these new jackets is the breathability and the comfort factor. The old coats that we have, which we happen to have one right here. As you can see, this is Jean's old jacket. And you can tell by looking at Jean and looking at this coat that this is not designed for Jean.
I'll put it on and show you.
Yeah.
This is a unisex medium.
So it's not horrible, but you know, it's definitely not a coat that's designed for the female body. It has pretty much zero visibility, or sorry, not zero visibility, but breathability. And for someone like myself who's a little heftier, I do sweat, and so not having no breathability at all is an issue. The new jackets are very breathable, and as well as they come with a much greater what we call an R factor, you know, for warmth. They're a much more popular jacket that way. Again, like Jean said, these are a standardized jacket. The color is never going away. The warranty is never going away. You know, so it really is a one-time purchase, you know, unless we're looking at a big influx of members, which would be amazing to have, but probably not very likely in a finite community like we live in. Again, the jackets will have a much greater windproofing than the old jackets, given the fact that they're simply worn out from being in the bush so often and getting washed, you know, occasionally. You try not to wash that type of coat very often, but they do have to be washed. And I know that since COVID, you know, we've all, we wash our stuff a whole lot more than we used to. So I know I work for BC Ambulance, and I wash my jacket, you know, at least once a week now, where, you know, we hardly ever used to wash them in the past, right? So again, you know, with the older jackets, they're when that jacket came out, you know, that was an excellent coat. Its natural lifespan has just come to an end, and it really is time for us to move up to the new jackets that is more comfortable for everyone to wear, and especially the females wear a jacket that's actually, you know, reasonably well fitted.
Pretty good timing.
Is that exactly 10 minutes?
You used up an extra
5 seconds.
We practiced. We were told, Ryan said
10 minutes.
10 minutes.
You did really well. I'm really happy not to have to try to interrupt. Thanks for coming, and thanks for clarifying what you're asking for. Right. So before you go,
Yes.
sit down. I think the board members might have questions or comments that they want to make before you go. So anybody on the board?
If you wanted to just hold, I have one of the newer models. If you want to just hold the coats and see the weight difference, because for the women, that's what they're finding is a 2-pound coat or a 1-pound coat. You know, it really, by the time you spent 4 hours in the bush, that extra pound, they can feel it. They really feel it. So the newer model coats are so much lighter and slicker.
Thank you. Any questions from anybody on the board? Director Brander.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make a comment first. Last year, I had a friend who was involved in I was on the scene as well, had a pretty tragic accident out on Mahoney, and search and rescue showed up and safely got him off the mountain. And I just want to say I was really impressed with all the work that was done at that time. I thought everybody handled themselves very professionally, and From what I understand, it was actually quite surprising that we got him off the mountain alive. So everybody did a great job. I have a question for probably Ms. Greenan. If we were to consider funding this, what would be the best way to go about doing it? You know, like what pot do you dig into, I suppose?
Ms. Green, I see you're on the screen. Do you have an answer for that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think the best method for funding this would be through the Grants and Aid General, as that is a regional grants and aid program. The only issue with that is that we would have to increase that budget for 2022 in order to fund the, I think, I just wanted to double check. I think, are you looking for 66,000 now or for 56,000?
66.
66.
Oh.
Okay.
And that's the top end.
That's the top end,
Yeah.
yeah. Because it's the more coats we order, the better the quote our Terex gives us. So
Okay.
10 quotes, 5%, 20 coats, 10%, 40 coats, 45%. We have to join the Arteryx Pro program to get the coats designed for search and rescue, that they designed for search and rescue. So they wouldn't give us and then of course the deckling and the as many stripes as you want on your coat makes a difference. But they gave me a soft quote of 66.
Thank you. So I think that the best method would be through grants and aid, and we might have to increase that that budget. And then we would ask you to go through the grant and aid like the application, which is due on March 31st.
Thank you.
Anyone else have any questions or comments? Director Gisborne.
Thank you, Chair. My understanding from your presentation was that you're also searching other sources of grant funding. Was that correct?
Well, we were hoping you would give it all to us, but if you don't, yes, we're searching other funds. Yes, like if you guys decided that half was all that you could afford, then we would go finding the other half. Right? Gaming, the provincial gaming grant, their boundaries for public safety come out next week, beginning of March. So we'll know if they're going to cover coats or not. But again, it's hit or miss with them. And we were going to do the same presentation we gave you guys to the city, depending on what happened here.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised that the province isn't stepping up to the plate a little more, but I'm okay with providing some funding.
Given everything else that they fund for search and rescue, I'm not surprised they don't fund jackets.
Oh, okay.
And they do put a lot of money in.
Thank you. No further questions, Chair. Thank you.
Director Leishman.
My question was answered. Ms. Green asked my question, so thank you.
Get my attention, Mr. CAO.
Yes, I am, Chair. Just for information, if the board does approve to go through with a general grant and aid, and no matter how much they give you, just be rest assured that the city has already contributed to that general grant and aid. And if you go knocking on their door for more funds separately at the city, you may not get a warm welcome.
Okay, noted.
That's good. That's good.
That's good advice.
Thank you.
So I don't see anybody else with their hands up. So thank you for coming and making your presentation. And your item of correspondence, I think, is the next thing that's on our list, on our agenda. So thanks for coming.
Thank you.
No unfinished business. That takes it to item 6.1 of the correspondence. Pleasure, folks.
I'll move receipt.
I don't think I heard you, Chair.
Director Paul, make a motion to file.
Yeah, I move to receive it.
Point of order, I had a different motion because moving receipt is kind of redundant. So I wanted to move that we direct staff to bring us back a revision to our financial plan, including the amount of $66,000 from general grant and aid.
I'm not going to argue about who made the first motion because you both had your hands up. Director Fall spoke before I recognized him. So is there a seconder for Director Leishman's motion?
Second.
Director Brander. Any discussion? Would you like to explain it, Director Leishman?
I think I clumsily got my point out there that generally want to support this, and however we can pass this through to staff to amend the budget and increase the amount of general grant aid to cover the $66,000. I'd like to support that.
Director Brabazon.
I suggest perhaps, Chair, that we are putting the cart before the horse. They've already been advised that they have to come get a grant request in by March 1st. So we would be dealing with it at the Finance Committee in March. Unless I'm mistaken.
Just hang on a second. I'm going to ask people to wait until I recognize them to start talking. CAO.
Through the chair, I think the intent of Director Leishman's motion is to simply put the $66,000 in there. Otherwise, the chance is that they submit a grant application and there's no money in the pot.
Thank you. Ms. Greenan, you had a comment.
Thank you, Chair. That was the same comment, is that we only have 30,000 in the grants and aid general budget. So we would need to increase the budget, not the actual payout, but the actual budget to buy the 66,000 so that we had funding.
Director Gisborne.
Thank you, Chair. I heard March 1st. Correct me if I'm wrong, financial officer. Is the deadline March 31st? I thought the deadline is the end of March for grants.
Ms. Greenan.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the grant applications are due on March 31st, but because we will already have our budget approved by then, we won't be able to increase the requisition after we get that. So we'll need to have it to allow funding in the budget.
Okay, so my understanding is that we're increasing the budget, and then at a later date, April, maybe even May, we will then decide where that funding gets allocated. So that's the cart before the horse. Thank you. I think my understanding is correct. Thank you, Chair. No further comments.
Anyone else? All those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? It's carried unanimously. We've had the proponents have left before we get to that. Item 6.2, correspondence, January 25th, 2022, from Ann Carney, Texada Library Coordinator, RE Library Funding. Director McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. I would move receipt and that the board approve a grant of $1,537 through the Fall River Public Library Service.
Director Brander, are you seconding
it?
Any discussion? Director McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. This happened last year. They came and asked for a grant because of a budget issue, and that's how it was funded last year, was through the Powell River Public Library. So I'm hoping that the same would be appropriate for this year.
Anyone else? Director Fall.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask a question. Would such a grant, does the Texada Library need to apply for that through what's been proposed, or would this motion take care of that?
Ms. Greenan.
Thank you, Chair. Because the Texada Library is an arm of the Powell River Library, although they're volunteer run, we think we can just put that into the Powell River Library budget, and then it could be funded that way, so not through the general grants and aid process.
Okay, thank you. That's great. I just wanted to make sure nothing would slip through the cracks and they wouldn't get it, but I support this entirely.
Yeah, I didn't see any other hands, so I want to make sure I'm clear that I understand what staff have said. is that the regional district will simply put the funds into the library service budget, and the library service will then make a decision to give that money to the Texada library. Mm-hmm. Is that what you're saying the process is? Ms. Greenan?
Yes, yes, Chair, that is correct.
Interesting. Okay. Anyone else? All those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? I think Director Paul is in favor. There's a little delay coming.
Yeah, I'm in favor.
Carried unanimously. And now we have a request from the Kelly Creek Community School Association, RE 2020 to 2021 annual report and funding request. Director Brander.
Thanks, Chair. I'd just like to move receipt with the understanding that the funding request has already been included in version 4 of the budget that we are going to look at later on today.
Okay, have a seconder. Director Brev is on. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? Carried unanimously. Brings us to item 6.4. Correspondence dated January 23rd, 2022 from Van Anda Improvement District, RE Texada Road Rescue Funding. Director McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. I would move receipt and that the budget for Texada Rescue be increased by $4,500 in the draft of the budget that we're going to discuss later on today.
Seconder for that motion.
Second.
Director Gisborne. Want to go ahead and explain the motion and what it means?
Sure. It means that the budget for Texada Rescue would go from their typical, I think it's $15,000 a year, up by $4,500. They've not had an increase in many years, and the demands are great, as we heard from Texada Search and Rescue on the mainland. Texada Rescue operates the jaws of life, and it's being called upon to be used more and more often. So I think it's very important that we support this valuable service, and that they have not had an increase for a very long time. So I believe this is justified, and it's Texada taxpayers that are going to pay for it anyway.
Director Gisborne.
Service.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I'm curious to hear what Ryan Toms has to say. I saw his screen pop up and his hand start to raise. So is this possible to increase the budget by that amount? And I would like to hear from Manager Toms. Thank you.
Mr. Toms, do you have any comments? Maybe an answer for Director Gisborne's question.
Yes, I could, Chair. I did raise my hand there. I just want to make sure that the committee's aware that the amount is set in a regional district bylaw. And in order to raise the amount, you're going to need to amend the bylaw and raise that amount. So it's not just as simple as changing the budget amount, and would recommend there are some maybe other considerations that you want to look at, and a staff report ahead of that bylaw amendment might be good.
Well, I think what you're saying is that if we pass this bylaw, we wouldn't be able to actually amend the financial plan. We'd have to pass an amendment to the bylaw first. Yeah.
Through the chair, yeah, I think you meant to say if we pass this motion. But yes, if you pass the motion, it would actually be an invalid motion because you've got the number set at 15,000 in the bylaw. So you would have to amend the bylaw before you can increase the amount. And if I'm not mistaken, Linda could correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I think that is the limitation to that particular service.
Ms. Greenan, do you have a response?
Yes, thank you, Chair. The regional district can only increase a requisition limit by 25% every 5 years. And this requisition increase that they're looking for is 30%. So that would require statutory approval. It would, well, approval of the Inspector of Municipalities. So we would only be able to go to a limit of 18,750 in time for the 2022 requisition. And that it would need to be a, an amending bylaw. And then we would have to add it to the budget if the board wanted to increase it by the 25%, but we could not increase it by the 30% this year.
CAO.
Through the chair, and I don't want to steal the thunder from Mr. Toms, but there are other considerations that the board needs to be aware of. The one primary one is, who is the AHJ? We are just a funding contributor to this service. And this service is actually owned and operated by the Van Anda Improvement District. So you really have to be careful in how you as the board are seen to be funding that organization. And I think that's why Mr. Toms has recommended a staff report so that everything can be put on the table so you're making a fully informed decision.
So to encapsulate what we've heard so far, I'm just going to try to say this to try to make things move a little quicker, is that actually passing the motion on the floor appears from our staff advice to be an improper motion. And the CAO is suggesting an alternative. So Director McCormick, what's your pleasure?
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so I will withdraw that, or whatever the appropriate word is.
Okay, just hold on 1 second right there. Does everybody agree to allow Director McCormick to withdraw the motion that she previously made? Mm-hmm. That's done.
Okay, and
Step 2.
Step 2 is to move a motion asking for a staff report for increasing the funding to Texada Rescue.
Second.
Seconder for that, Director Gisborne. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you, everybody. That brings us to item 6.5, correspondence dated February 14th, 2022 from Timothy Atwood, Texada Art, Shelter and Tourism Society. President RE, agenda item 7.2, financial assistance process update. Director McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. I would move receipt and that the letter be considered under item 7.2.
A seconder for that. Mr. Brander, any discussion? All those in favor of the motion? Oh, Director Brabazon.
Thank you. And I would like to see a motion include where the source of the funds is. Is this coming from electoral area D, grant and aid?
Is that a question for the CAO?
That's a question for the chair. We'll turn, I'm sure, to an authority.
I'm going to turn to the CAO. If your question is, where does this money come from? I'm going to turn to the CAO and see if he has an answer.
Through the chair, if I may have liberty just to ask some clarifying questions. Are you talking about the current status or the proposed status?
I didn't recognize that. Oh, no. So the way it's worded is through the electoral area grant and aid service. Is that specifically area D?
So this motion, if I can try to help, the motion that Director McCormick has made is that the letter be received and considered with item 7.2, which is 7.2 is a financial assistance process update, which would be a change to the process for financial assistance. So it's difficult to tell at this point whether the process might be changed or not changed, or if it was changed, what it would be changed to. So the end answer is impossible. The CAO might try to answer. He's better at things like that than me. But I think it's an impossible question to answer at the present time.
I will accept your decision.
So the motion is that we receive the letter and we consider it when we're considering 7.2. Anyone else? All those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? Carried unanimously. Then, if I'm correct, going up and down my agenda here quickly, we are at item 7.1, financial plan, draft number 4. And I suggest that Ms. Greenan might have some things to say about this draft.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a presentation. If I could share my screen, please. Thank you. I'm pleased to present the final and 4th draft of the 2022 to 2026 financial plan for the regional district. I'll go through the assumptions again as I sort of a broken record here, but so the assumptions are, that's the first thing I'll go through. Then I'll go through the 2022 Community Works Fund, the 2022 capital project highlights, observations and recommendations on the budget, the requisition and tax rate changes, and then the average residential tax rates per area, next steps, and then I'll entertain any questions. So the assumptions in the plan are that operational costs, unless they're identified otherwise, will increase by 2 to 3%. Insurance will increase by 10%. Return on investments, we're expecting 1%. Equipment financing projected at 3%, and future borrowing is between 3 and 4%, depending on the timing. Payroll allocations are all based now on the 2021 time and motion. And the tax rates are represented as residential tax rates per $100,000 of net taxable value. So tax rates for other business industry will be at a different multiple based on the provincial multiples. The tax rates are based on the 2022 completed roll because that's all that is available until the end of March. So the actual tax rates in everyone's tax notices will be based on the 2022 revised roll. The CPI incorporated into many contracts and the exempt staff salaries is based on the actual CPI for 2021, which is 2.8%. The 2021 actuals that you see in the plan are only until February 7th, 2022. So those actuals will change until the year end is completed. And then when we produce the financial plan for the website and for managers, it will have the 2021 actuals in that plan. The 2023 to 2026 projections are all, as I said, based on 2 to 3% projected increases on most items. And the reserve fund contributions, just so you're aware, the interest earnings are not yet posted. So the allocations may change once we get those allocations posted and any year-end adjustments determined. So the 2022 Community Works Funds, we get $361,000 approximately every year to spend on eligible projects. And those projects are outlined in the administrative agreement, 2014 to 2024, and future allocations to that fund are estimated. There are expanded categories now that include fire halls and fire stations infrastructure. And so we have incorporated some of the community works funds to those types of projects. January 1st, 2022, we expect to have approximately $1.4 million available. And we have proposed allocations of $938,110 in the 2022 budget, which will leave about a balance of $1 million. And we recommend that that may be maintained for future regional district projects. So some project highlights, project and capital highlights are continuation and expansion of the regional Fire Smart program, continuation of the coastal flood mapping for the islands, detailed design and initiation of construction at the Resource Recovery Center, completion of the Northside Fire Hall Training Center, replacement of the aerial imagery for internal use and for online mapping purposes, a water refill station for the Malaspina Fire Protection, which will be located at the maintenance facility, the community services offices, replacement of a fire engine for the Savory Island Fire Protection Service, and water line upgrades for the Myrtle Pond water system, wildlife fencing for the Texada Island Airport, and a wastewater monitoring system at the Lund sewerage system. Some observations on the plan, just so you're aware, are that as I said, the prior year surpluses are projected. So we still have to determine the actuals. And we also recommend adding the prior year surpluses to reserve for most of the services. Some services don't have reserves. And in those cases, we have recommended bringing the full prior year surplus forward for use in 2022. And some services, if they don't need the additional prior year surplus, then we have brought a lot of that forward to 2022's budget. Asset management plans are being developed, and they will better inform our long-term financial planning and our reserve fund contributions. Insurance appraisals are required in 2022, and those are underway. The 911 budget that you see in the financial plan has a $15,000 contingency added to it. And the reason for that is that the 911 contributions from each shareholder are based on a combination of assessed values and the census values. So now that the 2021 census is out, the allocations between each shareholder might change. So we put a contingency in that budget just in case our contribution increases. The Lasqueti Island landfill, we had to do an adjusting entry of $329,000 in 2021 in order to bring that to bring the landfill liability reserve to the correct balance, because we had new information, we have new CPI rates, and we also had a new projected cost to do the annual ongoing monitoring until 2045. The Paul River Library, the budget has been adjusted now based on the 2021 census data. So you may see a change there from what you saw in draft 3. So the requisition changes for each area are shown on this table. So the tax rate per $100,000 for the city of Paul River is $62.43. Area A, $272.14. Savory Island, $158.38. Area B, $180.59. Area C, $188.26. And Area D, $198.86. And Area E, $211.84. These rates do not vary. They're not significantly different than what you saw at draft 3. And the changes per average home, we're valuing an average home at approximately $516,655. And that is, that doesn't represent each area. It's just an average over the whole region. So for the city of Paul River, the cost per average home in 2022 is projected at $322.54 for QRD services. Area A, $1,406. Savory Island, $818. Area B, $933. Area C, $973. Area D, $1,027. And Area E, $1,094. So to complete the budget, we just will incorporate any direction that we receive at this meeting, and then we will determine the 2021 actuals and post all of our year-end adjustments, and then we will be set for bylaw adoption on February 24th. So I'd like to open the floor to any questions.
Hey, directors, any questions? Director McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. I have a couple of questions. First of all, looking at the chart that Screenan just showed us regarding the cost per average home, et cetera. I note that Texada has the largest increase. And I would, if I ask staff, I'm sure they will say it's because you have the most services, even though our services, many of them are not even increasing. However, that's not my question. My question is, for that increase in tax dollars paid, what will the taxpayers see as a benefit to having paid that extra money? What are they going to see out of that extra money being spent?
That's a good question. Ms. Greenan, would you like to take a shot at an answer to that?
One of the things that they will see will be the Texada Airport wildlife fencing, which is a big project that has been considered for many years, and it's very much needed as far as I know. The other thing that you'll see is we have put an additional $25,000 aside for the Venanda dock facility because the reserve funds are getting quite low, and we know that we will have significant repairs and maintenance every 5 years. And the other things, I'd have to look at all of the details to figure out exactly what else, but those are some of the big things I think that Texada will see.
Director McCormick.
Thank you. If I may continue, when I look at the, I'm looking at page 12 of the report. When I look at the annual requisition comparison participating areas, and I'm looking at general administration, increase 68,000 for regional administration, and then another increase in the electoral area. What's that going to be used for?
Ms. Greenan.
Thank you. That will be used to support operational cost increases and all of the staffing changes that were made last year. Those are the main things. And we do have the, I should show you the capital plan. If you look at the capital plan on page, so the capital plan starts on page 20, or yeah, 28 of this agenda item, or page 64 of your agenda package. So there are a number of capital items that are happening for general administration. They are funded from the reserve, but our operational budget does fund contributions to the reserve. So one of the things is the maintenance facility. They're upgrading the chlorination system. That is from the COVID-19, the leftover COVID-19 reserve. They're replacing the copier at the main office here, and then we're taking the copier from here and putting it to to the maintenance facility. New air conditioner in Unit 105. Entrance gate modifications at the community services offices, and to complete the boardroom audio visual upgrades. Those are some of the highlights of the capital plan for general administration.
McCormick, I don't see any other hands up at the present time.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Well, just tell me when it's time for someone else to ask a question. Okay, then I just wanted to ask about the total operating budget. Is that, am I correct that the operating budget is about 9.2 million?
Ms. Greenan.
The total operating budget for the, yes, the total, well, the total tax requisition is 9.2 million. The operating budget is higher than that. That is just the portion that comes from taxation.
May I ask what the total operating budget is?
Yes, one moment, please. I'll just bring it up. So the total operating budget for 2022 is $12.4 million.
Thank you, Chair.
I'll give you
And
one more question, then Director Fall had his hand up.
okay, last question. What is the capital budget for 22?
14.3 million.
Thank you.
Director Fall.
Thank you, Chair. I have one comment and two questions. And the last question's about the fire department, so I'll leave that for a second because it takes a bit more to explain. The comment is regarding the Lasqueti landfill and the monitoring, and it's not so much I don't want to make it a question because that's an issue for another time, but just from a budget point of view, I guess the expectation was that the monitoring would cost about $8,500 a year going out to 2045, and the new understanding is it's about $18,000 a year out to 2045. So that represents about $240,000, almost $10,000 a year more. And it's not there's neither here nor there. We just have to do it. It's the way things work. That's the taxpayers will just have to shoulder that. But I just want to raise, as I have in the past, that this does represent a bit of a I call it intergenerational inequity, in the sense that the current and future residents will have to shoulder that cost, as well as covering the high costs of our waste management already, whereas the money was not saved for that, and it's really just a cautionary note. Maybe it's a plug for our asset management strategy that if we'd had a life cycle analysis done on that back in the 80s or whenever it was done, it wouldn't have been used for free or nearly free for all those years. But nonetheless, it is what it is, and I appreciate the changes. The first question I have, which is kind of a general one, I held a town hall last night, virtually, as I do every year before the budget's done, and the budget was a big part of it. And I was presenting the changes in our in the tax basis. So on page 63 of the agenda, which is page 223 of the report, and I guess a question came up about what exactly those values mean. So the numbers go for they're increasing a lot on Lasqueti Island by over 30%, and higher in some areas and lower in others, but high everywhere. But for Lasqueti Island, it goes from 18 million to 23 million. But that from my calculations, I was trying to describe, I guess I couldn't quite adequately answer what those values were, because they seem to be closer to about 1/10 of the actual dollar value when you do the calculation. So maybe I could ask through the chair to Ms. Green, and if she could just clarify for myself and maybe interested taxpayers what those values mean.
Ms. Green, would you like to try to answer that?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, what those are is, you're correct. They seem about 1/10 because they're converted values. So the way that we calculate how much of a residential tax rate we need is we take the total assessed values that BC Assessment provides, and then we have to convert them, like sort of boil them down to be so that we can express the tax rates as a residential tax rate. So I could show you what those rates look like, what those values look like as the total assessed values. So with me one moment, I can bring that up on my screen.
Yeah, I thought for 23 million, maybe someone would buy Lasqueti Island, but
yeah,
230 million, maybe not.
Right. So let's see. One second, please. Oops. So I'll just share my screen for a second here. So kind of small. So I'm trying to make it a bit bigger here. So these rates that you see here are the completed converted values. So if you look at Lasqueti Island, it's 23,846,000 for a converted value. And then if we go down here to the, these are the assessed values. So Lasqueti Island is 232,940,000 before it is converted.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. That helps me understand a lot more. And I assume the difference is because of you know, different tax classes and so on. But that's that really
correct.
Helps. Thank you. So my second question relates to the fire departments, in particular LIVFD, but also Savory, because there's a, you know, this change that's going to come in the next draft, I suppose, related to some of the salaries. So the salary item will go up by about $8,000, a bit over for both of them, $8,700 for Savory. But the question I have is, and I'm open to do that if it's needed, because, you know, as we'll talk about later on, our, you know, asset management is important, and on Lasqueti we've got a bit of a deficit. But my question is it actually needed? Because when I look at the draft surplus right now for Lasqueti Island, it's in the 70,000 for, not for Lasqueti, for LIVFD. So that's on page. I'll have to find it, but it's basically over 70,000. Now that's of course open to change, and you know, it's not. So it's on page 181 of the agenda. So and for Savory Island, it's a little bit less. It's more in the 20%. But the, you know, the budget last year was 230, the total expenses, with an estimated surplus of 75,000, 74,800. And so, and some of those things are items that, as I understand, you know, some of them will be revised upward, of course, the expenses, but some are things like the honorariums that just haven't been spent. And I'll have a comment on that in a moment as well. And some of them are things like training that just wasn't spent. So the honorariums were underspent, you know, waiting a policy. So there's about $30,000 there. So I guess the question is, do we need to, or will we be getting a larger amount likely for the surplus that will, you know, according to the recommended motion, will go into the reserve. So the actual amount going to the reserve will likely be more than 20,000 just by carrying on as we are.
Ms. Greenan.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I don't think that now that we see that the surplus will be quite a healthy surplus, we probably don't need to have extra funds at this point put into the reserve. And also, Mr. Toms is coming forward with a state of the assets, asset management planning report for the Lasqueti Island Fire Department. So that will give the board a better understanding of what will be required in the future for reserves in that service. So at this point, I would say it's not imperative that be increased.
Okay, thanks. That's kind of what I thought. I mean, I'm, you know, I'd be happy to have at least 20,000 going in, and it looked like it will. I mean, that would be about a 2% increase, and we know with the state of asset report, it'll be, you know, we're going to be dealing with bigger increases probably, but I think that's very good. And the last thing I want to say is related to the honorariums, and that was an item. Rarely do taxpayers demand more spending of local government, and that's one of the. I told some of the participants who were voicing, you know, their support for spending that, and that you know, the honorariums are a really important way to recruit and retain. And some of the participants on the call said, you know, we want that spent. So hopefully that'll roll out this year. That's just a plug for that's a supported budget item that people really are happy to see spent. Otherwise, I think I'm happy moving forward with it as it is. Thank you.
Anyone else? Don't see any other hands. We have one motion on the floor. Would someone like to make it? Director Brabazon makes the recommended motion.
Second.
Paul, you're seconding. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? Carried unanimously. Brings us to item 7.2, the financial assistance process update. An opportunity to speak. Explain this to us.
I don't know if she heard you, Chair.
I don't know if you heard me, Ms. Green.
Oh.
We are at 7.2, and it's your chance to explain it all and illuminate the report for us.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry about that. So what I was trying to achieve with this financial assistance process update was just to give some clarity around, you know, we had a lot of discussion about what is economic development, and it doesn't seem like the arts and culture fits well into the economic development envelope. If we think of those two as two different envelopes, the economic development is one envelope, and then the grants and aid are a second envelope. Arts and culture initiatives don't seem to fit neatly into the economic development envelope. And so I'm recommending that we bring those over into grants and aid. And it's not that we would be funding anything, not that we're going to decrease our funding that we have allocated in the past or that the board traditionally likes to give. It's just that it would give clarity to where the funding is coming from. For example, you know, if an initiative is benefits areas A, B, C, and D, then it could just be funded straight from the A, B, C, and D grants and aid, rather than muddying the waters and funding it through the economic development and area B. Or if an initiative only benefits areas A, B, and C, it could just be funded. If it's an arts and culture initiative, it could simply be funded from electoral areas A, B, C. So that's the main reason for these changes. And then the other changes are based at just improving the application so it's a little bit clearer for directors and for people that are submitting their applications. So did you have any other specific questions?
Okay, so I'll look, Director McCormick, specific questions.
Specific question, would the Economic Development Service continue to exist, just simply arts and culture items would not be funded from it?
Ms. Greenan.
Yes, that's correct. It would continue to exist, and it would just have, right now we just have tourism that I think fits neatly into that category. So we would still have the Economic Development Service, and then if there were other economic development initiatives that fit neatly into that envelope, then they would be funded from that.
McCormick.
Thank you. I'd like to ask a question from the report that we received, and it was a regard to a comment on page 8 of the report that the recommended changes would exclude organizations that primarily serve their membership. And I'm not sure that I understand that correctly, but if I look at that, say, as for example, the Texada Legion, one could argue that they primarily serve their membership, but share more than half of their operating hours when things are typical, are devoted to community events and community things that go on at no charge to the community, groups that use that facility. So I'm struggling to be able to support that when the recommendation is to exclude them. I mean, I don't want to be saying that this type of community contribution is not wanted or appreciated. What I guess I'm asking for some clarification around that, because I would hate to see that be the case with regard to this particular.
Ms. Greenan, do you have a response to that question?
Thank you. I think that the definition, we really have to look at primarily. So if the organization, if say, whatever we define as primarily, so I would define primarily probably as 90%. And if they served 90% of their membership and then only 10% of the general public, then I think that they should be excluded. That's where I was going with this, was the definition of primarily, instead of just having it as religious organizations, to open that up to other organizations that primarily serve their membership or direct religious purposes. And that language was taken from other examples of policies that I've seen from other regional districts.
I'll give you one follow-up question to that, and there's other speakers on the list.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate it. So does that mean then if the Legion can document and show that, say, 3/4 or 50% plus of their operating time that Legion is open is used by the community and not by the Legion for its own business, would that therefore not exclude the Legion under this definition?
Karina?
Yes, I would think that the board would be able to consider it if it served, a significant population other than just their members.
Thank you.
Okay, I've got Director Fall on the list, had a couple of comments. I want to point out that part of the motion is that an amended policy be presented to a future board presentation or meeting for adoption. So we're not at the stage of adopting yet. And my personal opinion is that I think subjective definitions like the one you're talking about is the kind of thing that would be considered when people were looking at grant applications and trying to make decisions on them. But I had a couple of questions, I think, maybe to really get to the bottom of what might be in an economic development and what might not. And on page 4 of 21 of the report, there is a list of grant initiatives that have been funded through economic development. It starts off with the broadband report. And you could go through those one by one and just tell us, in your view, which would be purely economic development functions and which would be not economic development functions, but more of a grant and aid program. Did you do that?
Yes, Chair. So I would consider the broadband report is an economic development function, because that report was looking at the status of our broadband connectivity in the region. So it definitely would support economic development, and would help people to want to come to the area if there is good connectivity. If there isn't, that might keep people away from the area. Paul River Academy of Music, I would say that fits more under arts and culture. Paul River Creative Economy, I would say that also fits under, I would say that's under arts and culture, or it provides, it's sort of, that one's a little bit blurry, but I would say that one, it's I'm not sure. I would say that one, that was a one-off, but it would probably fit under arts and culture as well. Paul River Film Festival, arts and culture. Paul River Logger Sports, arts and culture. Paul River International Summer Music Academy, arts and culture. Sunshine Coast Tourism, I would say that fits under economic development. And Texada Arts, Culture and Tourism. If it was mostly tourism, I would say that would fit under economic development, but because a lot of this work is aimed towards arts and culture, I would say that would fit under arts and culture. Texada Island Food Hub, I would say that fits under economic development. Tourism Paul River, that fits under economic development. And Townsite Jazz Festival, I would say that fits under arts and culture.
Great, thank you. I found that helpful. Director Fall, you had a question?
Thank you, Chair. I had maybe two questions. One, the first one is, I like the idea, the proposal to ask applicants to explain in more detail which areas will benefit and getting them to do that. And that would help if we make this change. So, you know, the question, which areas does your initiative benefit and how? So maybe the first question is, how exactly would that look at the board when we're deciding? Would that basically be for this grant and aid, if the motion would be, you know, this much from A, this much from B, this much from C, you know, whatever mix of areas are expected to fund that based on where the benefit is, and it could be any combination of electoral areas and the municipality. Is that how it would look on our agendas when we're trying to vote on these things?
Ms. Greenan.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so if the organization said, for example, that their initiative would benefit electoral areas A, B, C, and the city, then what I would recommend is that the board would consider funding a portion of it from A, B, and C, and then recommend that the organization go directly to the city to ask for a share of funding for that project. And the share of funding is always supposed to be based on the assessment base. So it wouldn't be an arbitrary amount. It would be, you know, whatever the proportionate share is from each of the areas, and then the proportionate share from the city.
Great, thank you. And I guess I want to come back a little bit to this definition of primarily, and I agree with what the chair said. I think having it defined a bit more clearly, but I'd just like to add to it that an organization, it's not, if I understand correctly, and I'll ask through the chair, Ms. Green, and they correct me if I'm wrong, but when we talk about primarily benefiting the public, let's say, that or the well-being of the public, that's about the project that they're being applied for, not the organization itself. So the example of the Legion, if the Legion said, hey, we want to apply for some funding that is for Legionnaires primarily or almost entirely, that might not fit in that. But if the Legion said, we want some funding to help us with a project that is to put on something that is of public benefit for the community, that would not be a problem whatsoever. That would be, and that doing this, if it's clear in the application, that the organizations would be encouraged to explain how their project that they're asking funds for benefits the public outside of their the membership in their organization. Is that a correct assessment?
Yes. Yes, that's what I was thinking as well.
Okay, thank you. That helps me.
Great. Then we've had a nice roundtable discussion here, so it's probably a good time to have a motion on the floor. We'd like to move the recommendation. Director Gisborne, you moving the recommendation?
Yeah, I'll move the recommendation. I had a comment, but
have a second here for that. Director Paul.
Part one.
It's
part 1.5.
It's all one motion.
Oh, it's two motions.
Oh, number one, yeah, we are on. Not all one. We've got a part one and a part two. So part one. Try to have a discussion on part one. Director Gisborne.
thank you, Chair. I just want to make sure my understanding is correct. Area B contributes to economic development through our grant and aid. So changing what grants are funded through economic development or grant and aid, you know, be it arts and culture or purely economic development, doesn't really affect Area B because we still contribute through the same mechanism. Is that correct? So this policy wouldn't affect the Area B grant and aid specifically.
Rena, do you have a response to that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, if you look on page 5, I've got a table, page 5 of the report, and then page 187 of your agenda package. The table shows that the 2021 budget funding sources, Area B is grants and aid and economic development. So in that case, Director Gisborne is correct. Like we would be moving $95,000 out of economic development and then into areas A, C, and D, but we would not be making any changes to Area B's grants and aid.
Okay, thank you. And my follow-up?
Any other discussion on recommendation number 1? Director McCormick.
I think you had a follow-up. You had a follow-up.
Do you have a follow-up question? Or?
Yes, I do, but I see Director McCormick wants to go. I'll pass the floor to her for the moment.
Okay, well, this is my second turn speaking, so I'm happy to defer, but to go back to something Director Fall raised, who provides an unbiased analysis of whether an event benefits a particular area, like Area D? For example, just picking an event out of the air, say the Townsite Jazz Festival, if they were to say, well, it benefits Area B because it's open, they can come and attend. But the reality is the ferry schedules don't work to attend the performers they want, and people don't go. And it's of no benefit whatsoever to the people on the island. How can that be said to be benefiting an area if no one participates from that area?
That's an interesting question. Ms. Greenan, would you like to try and answer that?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it is. I mean, who it benefits is, of course, very subjective. And that's where we would rely on the people that are putting on the event to say what areas they anticipate would benefit from from the initiative. For example, when you have something that brings visitors to the area, there's a good chance that when someone comes to the area, for example, if they come to a Texada Arts and Culture and Tourism initiative that might be advertised, they would come to that initiative and then they would say, oh, let's stay in Paul River, and then we'll go over to see that. We'll go over to see like the Texada Air Show or something while they're here. So it could benefit areas A, B, C, and D, an event that's happening on Texada. So as you say, it is quite subjective. And I think it's up to the organization to say what areas they think will benefit from it.
Yeah. Follow-up question, Director McCormick.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Okay, what concerns me about removing the arts and culture from economic development is that TACT, for example, Texada Arts, Culture and Tourism Society, has been receiving $12,000 a year through economic development. Now, that funding will now be will only come from Texada taxpayers. There will not be funding coming from any other areas. Am I understanding that change correctly?
So I'm going to try to answer that. Ms. Greenan had her hand up. When Ms. Greenan went through the list of items that would be, in her opinion, covered by economic development, Texada Arts, Culture and Tourism was on that list. So it would be covered according to Ms. Greenan. No? Okay. I'll let Ms. Greenan answer the question this time.
Thank you, Chair. Texada Arts, Culture and Tourism, I thought that fit more neatly under grants and aid rather than as like an arts and culture initiative rather than tourism. But I do still think that, in my opinion, I think that program benefits areas A, B, C, and D. I don't necessarily think that it only benefits residents from area D. It is an event that people would want to go to, and it might draw people to the area for that cultural experience. So I don't see a reason that it has to be funded just from area D, even if it's under grants and aid. It should still be funded if it benefits area A, B, C, and D, the same as it would have been funded under the other envelope of economic development.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Director Gisborne, you had a follow-up question.
I believe Director Leishman had her hand up, and I don't think she has spoken yet.
Okay. Director Leishman.
Thank you, directors. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to mention that some of the groups, it can be somewhat subjective on who actually attends some of the arts and culture events on the mainland, especially from Texada. But some of the groups really actually go out of their way to go over to Texada and do things like Prisma. Prisma has actually reported to the board when they pre-COVID have gone over and done concerts on Texada. So there are groups that are cognizant of the difficulties of some of the more remote areas to get over to the mainland. And I think they recognize that if they are being receiving a contribution from Texada, for example, they do make an effort to try to do education and concerts for Texada specifically. And I just think we should be aware of that effort on the part of those groups. So I just wanted to point that out. Thanks.
Yeah. Anyone else? Director Fall.
Thank you. I'll keep my comments brief, but I think the challenge is mostly for Texada. I think that making this change just makes it a bit more complicated. But I think the benefit of arts and culture events that occur on the mainland may be reduced for Texada residents. But as Ms. Greenan pointed out, arts and culture events on Texada also provide some benefit to the residents on the mainland. So I think it'll be up to us to make sure we balance that and try to figure out how that would play out so that those benefits are weighed and balanced out. Another possibility, and this is maybe a question that Ms. Greenan may be able to answer, but maybe it's not for now. It might be for later. So it's just an idea. But given the TACT specifically having arts and culture and tourism, TACT could potentially submit 2 separate applications, one focusing on arts and culture, that would be through grants and aid type process as proposed, and another for economic development if they have proposals that are tourism oriented that fits more in the economic development stream. So that may be one way to resolve the specific situation of TACT, which is a kind of an umbrella organization on Texada. So I'm just putting that out there as maybe a way that may help address some of the concerns that have been raised about Texada. For Lasqueti, it's of course relatively simple. Lasqueti, as a participant of regional grants and general grants and aid, Lasqueti Island does contribute some percentage of those funds. And as far as I'm aware, I would be surprised if there's ever been a grant from the general grant and aid to Lasqueti. I think that's fine at the current level of contribution. But if things get adjusted in a way that balances things out, for example, if that increased a lot of the contribution from Lasqueti, then there would be an expectation from the Lasqueti taxpayer that they could tap into that. So I think finding this balancing point is important for us. For Lasqueti, it's less of an issue, but I think we need to, I think we need to think about how to make sure it works for Texada and in particular the groups that are, this kind of balance where people can take part in events, and as Director Leishman just talked about, some events that are specifically both on the mainland and on Texada and so on. So that's just, I guess, my comments for now. Thank you.
Okay, so we are on recommendation number 1 of 7.2. Director Gisborne, do you have anything more to say about that part of the resolution?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to hear everyone else's input. What I have to say is Area B, like the way this policy could go either way, Area B still participates the same way through our general or through Area B grant and aid. So when something comes for economic development, whether it benefits Texada or something in the municipality or the greater region, Area B can still contribute through our regular grant and aid. And whether it's arts and culture or economic development, Area B can still act on it. If there's a benefit on Texada, Area B may not say, well, it's not a huge benefit to Area B. So we might not necessarily go, well, we should contribute, dollar for dollar. We might go, well, maybe 30 cents on the dollar, something like that. But ultimately that decision, I think, would be based on the individual applications, because of course we get all different applications from different organizations, and that's kind of what we're talking about here. And I think we'll have to look at those applications individually, and then it's up to the board to decide what is fair and equitable for the taxpayers. And of course we have to be cognizant of Lasqueti Island if we're, say, funding projects through general grant and aid, and then something's coming up on Lasqueti and we go, well, you know, it only benefits Lasqueti, but we got to go, well, hold on. We've been taking a bunch of money out of there from general grant and aid, so maybe a project comes up that we would fund on Lasqueti from general grant and aid just to, you know, help make it more equitable. So I think this is fine, the motion, but I don't even think we actually need the economic development service. We can just do it all as a board through grant and aids anyways, like as Area B does. Anyways, that's all I have to say. Thank you. No further comments or questions.
Any other comments on that motion before we vote? All those in favor of 7.2.1? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. Recommendation number 2. Would somebody like to move that? Director Leishman, seconded by Director Gisborne. Any discussion? Director McCormick.
Thank you. I don't like the idea of funding arts and culture directly from grant and aid. I think arts and culture is significant enough in our region that it should in fact have its own category. And that suggestion is made somewhere in the report that could be considered. I would far rather see arts and culture defined as something that we celebrate and that we do in this region, rather than just lump everything into grants and aid. I don't believe it's appropriate to ask groups like TACT to make 2 applications for a pot of money when it's very difficult to divide. They produce rat cards that have all the events listed. Well, that's a tourism thing, but then those events are used to promote other events, which is promoting that event. It's very difficult for them to come up with 2 different applications for one pot of money. So I would rather not ask them to have to do that. I believe 1 application per group is appropriate. So, Chair, I guess I am kind of speaking against the recommendation because I believe that instead of lumping arts and culture into grants and aid, that there should be a separate arts and culture category in our grant funding for these items. I think it's significant enough and should be recognized as such.
Thank you. Anyone else? Director Gisborne.
Thank you. On some points, I agree with Director McCormick. I think, you know, an organization like TACT should only submit 1 application. I think that would, you know, having one organization submitting multiple applications to different funding streams not only puts an administrative burden on the organizations, but also our organization. I think 1 application is fine, and then the board can decide what funding pools we can allocate the funding towards. And I've always found that arts and culture, it kind of goes hand in hand with economic development. There's all a community benefit there. Sometimes it's direct, sometimes it's indirect, and I'm happy to provide funding through just grant and aid because I think grant and aid is what they're asking for. They're asking for money. So yeah, that's my thoughts. Thank you, Chair.
Anyone else? Director Brander.
Thanks, Chair. I guess I would just like to hear from Ms. Greenan if it would actually be a requirement of TACT to submit 2 applications, or can they still just submit the single application to cover all of their activities?
Ms. Greenan, do you have an answer for that? How many applications would be required?
Thank you, Chair. I would submit that they could just submit the 1 application and that we would consider it as an arts and culture initiative.
Okay. Anyone else? Director McCormick.
Although following up on what Ms. Greenan said, a good portion of what they do is tourism because they are promoting the island generally and rat cards that go on the ferry, etc. So it's not an easy group to define in that sense. That's why I think arts and culture should have its own category and not just be lumped in with grants and aid.
Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, Director Gisborne.
I have a question for Ms. Greenan. If we get one application and it's for arts and culture, could the board still decide to provide funding from economic development and a variety of different services, or are we kind of limited or handcuffed? Or my question is, could the board choose to also provide from economic development if we so chose?
Ms. Greenan.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The Economic Development Service would still be available for funding requests, and if the board thought that the initiative fit into that category, then of course the board could opt to fund it from economic development.
Okay, so the board can still choose to, take different allocation funding sources. Thank you. That's it.
Okay, so what we're voting on now is 7.2, recommendation number 2. All those in favor? Any opposed? Director McCormick is opposed, and the motion carries. That brings us to 7.3, the Community Emergency Preparedness Fund, Emergency Operations Centers and Training. To get a report from staff on what this motion is about. Tom, do you have some comments?
Yes, certainly, Chair. Just to summarize my report, this is a grant through the UBCM, which we've applied on successfully over the past years to help build some of our capacities in our emergency operations center, like backup electrical generators, and more recently to keep elaborating on our emergency plans, working with our EOC staff, stakeholders, and especially public outreach, education, information around our community evacuation plans, and helping all of our residents right across the region toward that goal. And that's essentially what we're looking to build on into the coming year, is more exercising and training and public outreach.
Okay, thank you. Would anybody like to move the motion that's in front of us? Director Bravazon, seconded by Director Brander. Any questions or comments or debate? All those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? Carried unanimously. Next item, Lasqueti Island Fire Protection Service Capital Planning State of the Assets Report. Mr. Tom, comments on that one?
Yes, certainly. And I've asked our manager of technical services, as well as our GIS technician, to join, as they were instrumental really in developing the state of assets report that's appended to my report here to the committee. The goal is to work toward us achieving a capital plan for the long-range sustainability of the Lasqueti Island Fire Protection Service. And if you've read the State of Assets report, there are some significant challenges. And I think the report that Caleb and Nancy did does a very good job of just showing where we are right now in the service in terms of the major capital assets, the 2 fire halls and the fleet of fire trucks. Doesn't get down into the other details, of course, of some of the other capital items. But that's enough of a place to start. And that's consistent with what we did when we developed capital plans for the other 3 QRD fire departments. What's really important when we look at our asset management policy in the development of this capital plan is really outreach to the public and trying to understand the levels of service that the people who pay for the service are expecting on the island. And I think that will help us in making some of these decisions, or helping the board make these decisions really when we arrive at a capital plan, hopefully toward year end, that would inform reserves contributions going forward in the service. And maybe just one last thing, really then building on that idea of public engagement, we would look for board endorsement to go out the door, reconfirm really what we had planned to do just pre-COVID, was to start some public engagement. And we've lost some time, but I think we've also built a really good state of assets report that will help sort of guide at least a baseline of where we're at and help have that discussion and a survey with the public on where we want to go.
Great. Somebody like to move the motion?
I'll move the motion.
Director Fall, thank you. Seconded by Director Leishman. Director Fall.
Thank you, Chair. I'd first like to thank all the staff who put a lot of effort into this report. I mean, it's really comprehensive and lays things out as Mr. Toms just said. It's really the state of the system right now, the state of affairs. And I brought this up at the town hall last night. The virtual town hall I held, most of it was for budget, but I spent a fair amount of time on LIVFD as well. It's the LIVFD is the main regional service on Lasqueti. It covers, I think, approximately 40% or over 40% of all the tax requisition from Lasqueti is for that one service. So it's the dominant one. And of course, the numbers are huge. So I took some screen snapshots from it. I presented the main findings, the big tables and some of the numbers, so people could start wrapping their mind around. And as people who've been around for a while will know that some of these issues have been brought up before. We had information on asset management of the trucks and our shortfall in the past. We've also, going way back to the kind of slightly more controversial time of the dispatch and so on, 2014 and 15, there was a lot of contention around potential for a fire hall. So I wanted to try to help get this process on a good foot. I really think the recommendations are good. Going forward in the way that's been laid out is the right way to do it. And I tried to just tell the public, and I'll continue to do this, and I'm sure there'll be information going directly to the public from Mr. Toms, that just look at what's there, and then just wrap your mind around the principles of asset management. So just showing people and saying, for example, the fire hall, not everyone would agree that we need to build a new fire hall this year or next year or 5 years, but everyone would agree that at some point in the future we need to build a fire hall. So we can plan for that. What would that fire hall look like, and separate that from the timing. And once you have an idea of what the fire hall could be and the kind of cost in today's dollars, then you can start saying, well, if we were to do that in 5 years, how would we do that? And if we did that in 10 years, how would we do that? Can we save enough? Do we borrow, and what balance? Same with the trucks, same with everything. We talked about, the setting long-term goals. I think this will help have a plan of having long-term goals for people to say, well, we want to be at a place. For example, what are the objectives for the service? That's well outlined in the report. What's the timing to reach those objectives? So objectives could include things like, do we buy used trucks for a while and then a new truck, or just stick with used trucks, or when do we buy new trucks? Do we try to increase our fire underwriter survey rating? Do we set that as an objective? And if so, when? Is it something now, in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? So the process laid out is really good. And hopefully the feedback that we will attain will provide sufficient information to go to the next step to develop a concrete asset management plan for LIVFD that the public supports. Because I think this process will, people will be kind of maybe a bit shocked a bit by the numbers, but then they go through the process, they digest it, they decide what they want, and hopefully they support the plan. And then that will also set up expectations. That support is also expectations of what the financial and service implications are. The higher the service level, the more financial costs are going to be there, and that's laid out nicely. The graph on page now, they're showing the funding shortfall of that we're putting in 20,000, hopefully a bit more this year, but 20,000 on average, and our consumption on average is 100,000. Now, of course, you have to interpret those numbers a little bit, but I think people got the picture that we haven't been putting enough aside, and we need to do that. And whether it's that level or some other level, there's an expectation that'll go. So I just want to ask the board to support this, and to again express my appreciation for how this is rolling out. I think it will be a good process, and the survey, when that goes out, I think is a very good idea, and it will be hopefully I'll do what I can to help encourage people to participate, so we get a lot of of feedback, because that's basically what I told people. What can you do? Engage. When this comes, when you're asked, step up. This is your chance. You've asked for feedback. You've asked for consultation on these issues. Now's the time. Do it and be constructive. So hopefully we get somewhere with this and have something we can work with. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All those in favor of the motion? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much to all the staff who worked on it. Now, 7.5, Director's Remuneration and Expense Amendment. 2 cents. Yeah, that's your 2 cents worth.
That's my 2 cents worth. I'll move.
Moving the motion.
Yes.
You have a seconder? 2 cents can add up depending on how many times you pay it. Seconded by Director Brander. Any discussion? Don't see any hands up. All those in favor of the motion? Any opposed? That's carried unanimously. That was one of the easier ones tonight. No new business. Brings us to question period. Is Mr. Galinsky online? If so, does he have any questions?
Mr. Galinsky hasn't joined us this evening.
Hmm?
He has not joined us
He
this
has
evening.
not joined us this evening. Well, he will review the tapes, I'm sure, and ask any questions he wants to. Any members of the public attending who might want to ask a question?
No, Chair, nobody has indicated that they want to.
Okay, so that would move us into an opportunity for someone to make a motion for a proposed closed session. Who would like to volunteer to do that reading exercise? Looking around, everybody's looking back at me. Maybe we could just go home early. Got no volunteers. There'll be no closed session tonight, I guess.
I'll do it. Let's make sure. Okay, I move that the committee move in camera and that the meeting be closed to the public on the grounds that the subject matter to be considered relates to matters covered by the community charter under section 91I, the receipt of advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose, and N, the consideration of whether a committee meeting should be closed under a provision of this subsection or subsection 2.
The seconder for that, Director Leishman. All those in favor? Any opposed? Unanimously, we are now going into a closed session.
Get
Okay.
started.
Let me know when he's ready. And last little ceremonial bit that we have to do.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, we're good to go. We're back in open session. There is no rising report, so we are now adjourned. See you next time, folks.
Thank everyone.
Go for it, Sandy.
Good luck. Don't break any land records.
No.
Be safe.
Thanks, everyone.